Welcome back to the Lojo Show. This is your host, Sofi Godfrey speaking. As many of you know, Lojo has been leading some major initiatives across the country and beyond. So as this focus expands, we're evolving the show as well. I'll be stepping in as your host moving forward, and I'm really excited about the conversations we have lined up. And just a note for new listeners, Lojo is still part of the Lojo Show team. He's simply stepping back from hosting as his responsibilities grow. This conversation is one I've especially been looking forward to because OTAs were one of my first introductions to the defense industry and how innovation actually moves through the federal space. Early on, I had the chance to work alongside our special guest and others deeply involved in that process, and it gave me a firsthand look at why OTAs have become such an important part of accelerating technology and mission-focused solutions across government. If you've worked in federal contracting, you know traditional procurement can sometimes take years. But more recently, we've seen organizations move much faster throughout something called OTAs, or other transaction authorities. So today we're asking a simple question. How are companies able to move faster while still remaining compliant with rules? Please allow me to introduce our guest, Harry Aderton. Harry's an acquisition strategist with over 30 years supporting the federal government and deep expertise in OTAs, rapid acquisition, and mission-driven innovation.
Thank you, Sophie. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you for making the time, and thank you for having me. With respect to OTAs, it stands for Other Transaction Authorities, and really what that means is it is an acquisition procedure, or it's an acquisition mechanism, if you will. And acquisition is just a fancy way of saying, hey, here's the government taxpayer money, and it doesn't really exist until it gets on contract. And that's really what we're talking about, getting taxpayers' money onto government contracts, so that it gets basically recycled back into, the American ecosystem. For small businesses, large businesses, translates to food, dollars, livelihoods, what have you. So traditionally, before OTAs, actually, and along with OTAs, everything's been FAR-based, and FAR stands for Federal Acquisition Regulations. We just call it FAR. And FAR has been kind of the dominant acquisition methodologies for decades. And the problem with this, though, is because it's over-regulated to the point where it's bloated. There's a lot of checkbox mentality. It's a lot of processes, and it's just slow, right? It's just really, really slow. And we've all heard the jokes about how long it takes, anything to get on contract in the government. It's true. It's true to a degree because it's just bloated bureaucracy. But OTAs, other transaction authorities, can kind of flip that on its head. It can be very fast, but there are trade-offs. There's caveats associated with that, and I could talk about what goes into that, and I'll be happy to do that as we continue down this discussion.
You are absolutely right, Harry, about that timeline. Since working with you, I've seen the OTA work firsthand and is beyond faster than any other traditional contract. And as you know, OTAs weren't initially created to replace traditional contracts, as you mentioned, FAR. They were created to solve a specific problem. What problem was that?
That's a great question. So OTA stands for Other Transaction Authorities, as I mentioned, and OTAs have been around since 1956 or 58, I believe. And the first government agency to use them was NASA, and it was to buy rocket fuel. But the reason why OTAs aren't really used a lot today, even though they're super fast, you get the capability faster, it's really all about speed. But the reason they're not really used today is because they're considered outside the federal acquisition regulations, which means they're also considered high risk, and there's a high chance of corruption, of not following the rules, fraud, waste, and abuse. It's one of those things where because it's not regulated, it could be it could be tricky, and it could be also in the wrong hands. There could be a lot of shenanigans going on, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting, especially because I think a lot of people hear the term OTA today without realizing it was originally created to solve a very specific challenge around speed and innovation. Now that we've talked a bit about the why behind OTAs, I want to shift into a practical side of it for companies working in federal contracting. They may be wondering what the OTA process actually looks like from start to finish. Harry, could you break down the life cycle of an OTA?
Yeah, for sure. So OTAs, as I mentioned before, it's outside of the federal acquisition regulations, and it's not really taught. In fact, the Defense Acquisition University, that's kind of the professorial group within the government that teaches one how to do contracts. And contracts, it could take years to master, if not decades, right? Uh, they don't really teach how OTAs are used because they're not really supposed to. Again, OTAs exist outside the FAR, and anything outside the FAR, it's not really supposed to be used. But something interesting happened during this new administration, or the current administration, I should say. The current administration has decided, and I think, and this is very wise of them to see it this way, is that you can't have land, sea, air, and space dominance if you're letting the speed of getting something on contract impede your ability to actually execute. What that means is, for example, let's say AI, an emerging technology, it's taken over anything and everything. And if the US government didn't have a very fast way of getting emerging technology into the hands of the warfighter faster, better, more efficiently, then it could be very detrimental. And we've all seen what emerging technology can do. For example, in the Ukrainian war, right? And what an $80 drone can take out a $2 billion bomber. And they simply armed this drone with some IEDs, and they sent it in, and they blew it up. That changed everything. And emerging technology is something that if we don't get our hands wrapped around it, we're cooked. And I think the new administration, the current administration, they saw that and they said, hey, if it takes 18 years, and I'm making this up, right? It's probably closer to 4 to 6 years. But if it takes that long to get something on contract, then what's the point, right? It's AI is kind of leapfrogging over each other, every couple of weeks. And if we waited, 4 to 6 years to get something on contract, let's say even in the AI world, then all of a sudden we're about 100 generations behind by the time we get this thing actually comes out. And you could say that about any software, about any hardware, about any technology. And time is not good when it's used against us, right? So what we need to do is be able to make time an ally. And the only way we can do that is through speed and execution and capability. And that's why I think that's why they decided to pivot more towards OTAs in the Department of War. And I think that's a very good sign, because it is improving the acquisition lifecycle. It's making things happen faster, and it supports all our Department of War agencies. And I think that's an awesome thing. Okay. So going back to your original question, the structure around an OTA. OTAs, it depends on and I'm going to sound boring here. It depends on the acquisition center, the contracting center that wants to actually use another transaction authorities. It depends on their ability to understand it, their ability to accept the risk that comes with it, the ability to put it to practical use. And a lot of times that experience level is varied. So when you do have the right experience, the right personnel, the right group that knows how to take advantage of the OTA, it becomes a very streamlined process where it doesn't take, again, 4 to 6 years or anything even close to that. We could literally get something on contract in a matter of weeks, and it still provides the same level of capability and capacity and execution, but it does it at such speed that it really does benefit the U.S. government, that much more quickly and, that much more efficiently.
That's really helpful, because I think a lot of people hear the term OTA but don't actually realize there's still a very structured process behind it, even if it moves faster than traditional contracting. So that leads perfectly into my next question. Why are so many companies gravitating towards OTA opportunities now?
Well, for 2 reasons, I think. One, as I mentioned, the Department of War is kind of pushing, industry and their different acquisition centers to kind of move down that path. But 2, I think it's just better overall. I think most companies, small businesses, large businesses, even the mid-tiers, they're just tired of the process. The process is not easy for anyone who's not familiar with the way it works. in the federal government or in the Department of War to get anything on contract of significant size, let's say between $5 and $10 million. And that's, for what it's worth, that's actually considered on the smaller size in the federal government. But even something in the smaller size, that can run around $250,000 because it goes over the course of so many years. I keep mentioning these 4 to 6 years, and it's true. It can be faster. I've seen it happen maybe in 18 months. But just think about that. If in 18 months, to 5 years, that's a pretty long time. And in that time, you have to go through so many different steps because of the federal acquisition rules. I mean, for example, the government has to put out a sources sought, and that's just a way of getting information. And then industry, when I say industry, I'm talking about, companies that are either small businesses, large businesses, or the mid-tiers. They have to respond to the government with their interests, right? They do their called request for information, and they respond with their RFI responses. And these are basically says, yep, I do want to work with the government. And yes, I do have past performance that proves this. Yes, I do have contract vehicles that support this. And then on top of that, once you realize that, hey, you want to go after something, then you got to start playing the game. And the game consists of, in no particular order here, you got to start getting the right teammates. You got to start doing your research. Who's the incumbent? Basically, who currently has the work? Where are they falling down? Where are they doing great? Let's hire a consultant to get us into see the customer. And the customer in this case is a client. In the government world, we say customer. And in the private sector, we say client. Mm-hmm. How do we see that customer? Because there's over 1 million companies out there, and there's no way, that a customer wants to even see a fraction of that. So how do you get in to see a customer? Well, it's a very human business. It's a very relationship business in the federal space, because there's so many customers out there. Government folks, they're human, and they only want to work with people they know and trust. And I mean, who doesn't, right? I mean, I think that's fair. So, what they do is they find people that they know and trust. They get them in to see them. And then all of a sudden, they try to put the strategy together. And then the RFP finally drops. And then it's a 30-day slog. To just get this RFP out the door and this proposal. And it literally, and you're running flat out during this whole thing. So instead of a slog, I guess I should call it a sprint. You're running flat out. I mean, you're putting, you have all these people, proposal managers, coordinators, you have solution architects, you have SMEs, you have book bosses, volume leads, you have contracts people, compliance people, you have schedulers, you have talent acquisition folks to find the right team. And you're going through all these gate reviews, pink team, red team, gold team, and then white glove, and you have the graphics department. And then by the time you do get this out, it's exhausting. And then you just don't know. Then it's the waiting game. And you're constantly trying to figure out if you're going to win or not. And it could be protested. And that makes the opportunity go away in a lot of cases. The money could go away. That makes the opportunity go away. You still spent maybe 150 to 250K throughout this process from the first million. And then, after 4 years, you realize, hey, you lost. And that's painful. And so why, if somebody said, you know what, instead of going through all that nonsense, how about we just get a contract in place in about 6 weeks? Who wouldn't jump at that chance? And that's really the difference between OTA and, this traditional federal contracting. I hope I didn't over-explain that.
No, you definitely didn't. And while OTAs create a lot of opportunity, they also come with responsibility. Moving faster is great, but companies still have to protect sensitive information and meet security expectations. So what does it take for a company to go after an OTA contract versus a FAR regulated contract?
That's a good question, right? And that depends on the requirements associated around it. So along with security, they still have to abide by the other types of rules that go along with a submittal process. And those rules are usually generated for that specific OTA. So instead of having like a football field size warehouse, with stacked to the roof with all these regulations, and that's really what the federal acquisition regulations looks like. It's more like, here's a couple of pages on how we want you to respond, and just follow these guidelines, and then the government's going to make the award based off of your submittal. And it's just so much faster. It's just so much easier. And it just saves money for the government, saves money for the taxpayer. It saves money, if these businesses trying to get a dollar from the government to keep their lights on, and it's just better in a lot of ways, in my opinion.
That balance between speed and security is really important, especially as more companies enter the OTA space for the first time. So from your experience, what was the biggest mistake companies make when entering the OTA ecosystem?
Consortiums. Consortiums are the biggest mistake people make, because consortiums are not, for the most part, they're not legit. Anything where you have to pay out of pocket to join a consortium to do an annual fee, where they're putting up $500 or $5,000 or whatever the heck it is, just for the promise of getting an OTA, or even being on a down select, or even being in an OT ecosystem. That's complete BS. That is not good. And if you have to pay to play like that, then just run away, because that thing is a scam. And as you can imagine, the government is just so big, and it just has so much money that there's no bigger corporation in the world than the U.S. government, right? I mean, it's got
Right.
it's got the annual freaking revenue is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And of course, along with that, there's a lot of there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse on the industry side, taking advantage of other potential industry partners. And they do that through consortiums. They do that through other ways, where they say, hey, hire me, I can get you an OTA. Most of those are just scams. And the way to get around that is do your homework. Hey, reach out to me. There's a lot of good ways. Reach out to BlackRock. There's a lot of good ways to do this legitimately. And by doing so, hey, everybody wins in the end.
To your point earlier, you mentioned our current administration has changed the strategy for federal acquisition. Their intent was to make it faster, able to provide more capabilities, and cut through the red tape. Well, working with you prior to this current position, you introduced me to the Onyx OTA, and it seemed like it changed the way the industry is contracting. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Onyx OTA and how it follows the rules of our current administration?
Yes. So the Onyx OTA is just one of several of the newer OTAs that are coming out. And Onyx is very interesting. I've had the privilege and the honor of being with Onyx since the very beginning, in knowing about it, seeing how it was built, helping kind of stress test it, if you will. So I'm very familiar with the process. I'm very familiar with how to kind of navigate the buoys. And what's interesting about Onyx is that it just has, it's not really an OTA, first of all. It's what we call a flexible acquisition pathways. OTA is just, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's an authority. And OTA is just one authority. What's really cool about Onyx is that it has 5 flexible authorities. And that includes construction, like Milcon, for example. Milcon has been, that has been one of the hardest things to do in the federal government, is doing military construction. And it's literally, about 10 years behind. And it's hard to, it's hard to support our troops. It's hard to support the warfighter if, construction is always like lagging behind. So this fixes that, or at least it gives the ability to fix that. Other ways is through emerging technologies. You can use it for that. You can also reach out to academia, to all these different academic institutions. I mean, the MITs, the Purdue's, the Caltechs of the world. They can now have access to government contracts through these OTAs, through these different authorities. Shrink wrap software, CSOs, commercial solutions openings. That's another acquisition procedure that allows, the Onyx OTA to get to, shrink wrap software and even hardware faster than just about anything else. And then there's also procurement for experiments, and that's just a fancy way of saying, the scope is very wide, where you can pretty much run just about anything you need to through this OTA and flexible acquisition pathways, if you will, and be able to get something on contract, for the government. And as I mentioned previously, It helps the federal government, it helps the Department of War, it helps industry. It saves money for the taxpayer. There's just a lot of good benefits. I think the benefits certainly outweigh the cons, in my opinion.
Definitely. If there's one thing today's conversation shows, it's that OTAs aren't about bypassing rules. They're about enabling innovation to happen faster in a way that still protects the mission. They give organizations the ability to move at the speed of the problem, and while still maintaining the responsibility that comes with working in the defense space. For companies, this isn't just another contract vehicle, it's a shift in how collaboration happens between government and industry. It's opening the door for new ideas, new players, and faster solutions to real world challenges. But as we discussed today, with that speed comes responsibility, especially when it comes to speed, agility, and practicality. So, whether you're already working in the OTA space or just starting to explore it, the key takeaway is this: move fast, but move smart. Harry, before we wrap up, in one sentence, where do you see the OTAs shaping the future of defense innovation?
That's a great question. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, I would say this: defense innovation is in a whole new era of speed and capability because of OTAs and other non-traditional acquisition pathways.
Well said. Beautiful. Thank you, Harry. And thanks for joining us on the Lojo Show. Don't forget, here at BlackRock, we fix cyber. And we'll continue bringing conversations that help leaders navigate the world of federal contracting and, of course, cybersecurity with clarity and confidence.